Hi, it's Ashley with Simply Roses, and today I am making a beautiful all-white bridal bouquet. We are going to start with a hydrangea base. Hydrangea are wonderful because they give us this really beautiful shape to start with, nice and full and lush, and they are already round, so that's going to give us a nice, beautiful, round bouquet shape to start. And we like to use the white jumbo hydrangea. They are a more true white color and not that cream color, and they're gonna give us a more pristine look. When I'm starting my bouquets, I always like to do my larger flowers first. That way I don't put all my baby blooms in and then I'm stuck with these big flowers that are gonna completely cover those smaller blooms. So I'm going to go ahead and put my calla lilies in first. This was a special request from the bride. Her favorites are the calla lilies, so we got these really beautiful, not the minis, but the nice intermediate calla lilies that have great size, but also aren't going to overpower the bouquet. So I'm just gonna put these in. They are a pointed flower, so sometimes they can be a little difficult to work with because they don't lay into a bouquet like a rose or something like that would. But if you position them nicely, they give this really great texture and really beautiful lines. You just have to be careful you don't get too many on one side or the other, so that you're not getting an unwanted heaviness to either side of the bouquet. So as I'm doing this, I kind of go around in a circle. I also like to make sure that they are all facing kind of the same direction, like outwards or in, whichever you prefer, because it kind of messes with the flow of the bouquet, in my opinion, when they're facing different directions. So you just kind of find like a good place to insert. This one doesn't want to go in. Your calla around. So as you can see, we're kind of forming like this star shape in the middle. The cool thing about an all white bouquet is at first glance, it's not going to look like, with a colorful bouquet, you can't see every different perfect flower, but as you get closer, and when the photographers get those really great close-up shots, you can see all the different textures, all the different lines, all the different petal distributions in it. And it really is very elegant and very clean and very bridal. Okay, so we'll put our last couple callas in here. All of the groomsmen and groom, of course, will also be wearing calla lilies. I love a calla lily boutonniere. I call them groomsmen proof. They can get as rowdy as they want to, and at the end of the night, when I get there, they still have a calla lily intact, which is just fabulous because we all know they can be a little rough on their flowers. So now we've got this beautiful calla lily base in there. This by itself is gorgeous, but we're going to take it up a notch, and we are going to use alabaster garden roses. These have such a beautiful scent to them. Not overpowering, but just enough. Again, very bridal to me, very elegant and vintage, and they add really wonderful texture to the bouquet again. They kind of are on the smaller side of a garden rose, which I really, really love. I just think they're really delicate. So I'm going to tuck these in all in between my calla lilies here. Any place where I see a dip in my hydrangea, that's a great place to put a rose in. They're just going to be used to round out the bouquet. And I also like to keep in mind they do have kind of not a very bendable, pliable neck to them, so I won't often put them around the edges very much because they can have a tendency to snap. So that are nice and pristine. Normally, as a company, we kind of embrace the imperfections that we find in roses. Those outer packing petals help them stay closed. That's something that we really try to encourage and educate our clients as to why they're there and why they're so wonderful. But when it comes to a bridal bouquet, it really is, you know, a day that we want to make sure all of those petals are perfect and pristine, so those pictures are going to come out nice and clear, and then our bride's holding a really beautiful special bouquet that's been tailored nicely. Second to last, we're going to put in some ranunculus. This is a beautiful flower. They almost kind of resemble like a small peony. They have, of course, really feminine texture to them, lots and lots, high petal count on these. They also make a wonderful boutonniere. I do like to kind of cluster these together. I feel like they show a little bit more when they're grouped, just because they are a smaller flower, but I try not to create, you know, like a straight line with them or anything like that. We still want to make sure that we're putting them in interesting, appropriate places. So as I'm turning my bouquet, if I see a little dip somewhere, you can continue to move the flowers that are already in the bouquet. Don't feel like they're stuck in one place. If something isn't working for you or a particular flower isn't behaving in an area, don't feel like you can't take it out and put it back in. They can always work somewhere else. And so basically we just keep turning the bouquet and finding spaces that are lacking a bloom. Again, we want to make sure that we're balanced. We don't want all of our ranunculus on one side and none on the other. We also want to make sure we're paying attention to the way that the flowers are placed, as far as the way that they're facing. Flowers have a face. So this is the back of his head, this is the front of his pretty face. So we want to make sure that that's what's shining. We don't want to put a piece in a rounded bouquet where the back of his little head is showing. We really want to make sure that he is shining and either standing upright or facing out so that we can see the top of the bloom. Gorgeous. I already love this. Okay. All right. Okay, our last little piece, flower-wise, is going to be sweet pea. We have these beautiful sweet pea in. We've kind of trimmed the bottoms of the blooms off a little bit so that we can keep our bouquet rounded. They do have blooms that extend all the way down the stem pretty much, so in a more garden-y styled bouquet, I would keep those on, keep them long, and then just have them float. They are such a feminine addition to a bouquet. They just give this really great kind of butterfly texture to it. One of my favorite flowers to incorporate in a bouquet for sure. And they also have nice thin stems, so they're easy to get into a bouquet once you've already, you know, added most of your components into it. So that's always a nice treat, because sometimes you get some of those thicker stems and it's so hard to work them into a bouquet at the end, and you end up having to really rework and reshape a little bit at the very end, and that's never fun. And again, as I'm turning, I'm seeing, okay, did I have something turn? Did I have something move? My callas, you know, they like to twist a little bit, so I'm making sure I'm moving those back into the position that I wanted in the beginning. So pretty. So as you can see, I'm just twisting this in my hand, turning it around to get these little blooms tucked in here. This is another flower that I always suggest. Not only is that hydrangea giving you like a beautiful base, it's actually also kind of a cushion for your other flowers. When you are putting flowers around the edge of a bouquet and then you're holding it tight with your hand, or you're wrapping it with bind wire or tape or anything like that, at the very end of this process, you know, it gets pretty tight around the bottom and you're holding on to it for dear life to make sure that it all stays together. So if you have a stem that's inflexible or thin on the edge, it's gonna break your head. And mind you, maybe it doesn't do it while it's in the design room, but rest assured, while it's being handled by the photographer and by the bride and everybody's walking around, you know, before the wedding even starts, you run the risk of having something like a tulip or a ranunculus or a sweet pea just snap off before the event even starts. And we don't want to have a bouquet that's not as beautiful as it was when you dropped it off, walked down the aisle. So that's just something in mechanics that I really try to make sure in positioning that the blooms that are around the edge are gonna hold up and hold out, you know, to make it down the aisle just as beautiful as it left the building. So right now I just finished the last of the flowers that are going into this stunning bouquet. So and I'm even noticing now I do have a ranunculus that's around the edge here that's kind of, you can see that it's hanging away from everything else. That is kind of a red flag for me. So he's coming out and I'm either gonna tuck him up higher, try to actually cut his stem's a little big. I'm gonna tuck him up higher so that he doesn't hang so far out, and that he's got some cushion from that hydrangea. Actually not a great place. He might have to go somewhere entirely different. And that's okay. It's important to make sure that you're watching your bouquet and rework it. I can't tell you how many times I've finished it, looked at it and said, okay, I don't like it, put the whole thing down, start again. You always want to make sure you've got time to make tweaks and change things if you need to. Okay, so here is our base of our bouquet. We've got all these gorgeous flowers. The last thing, our bride wanted a touch of a garden element, wasn't really big on the huge, beautiful garden bouquets that are so in style right now. She wanted something more tailored, more clean, soft, feminine, and her accent color in her wedding is silver as a metal. So what we're going to do is use Dusty Miller. I get this frilly Dusty Miller rather than the big flat leaf. It lays around a bouquet really beautifully, has a little longer of a stem, so it's gonna stay hydrated and beautiful. I'm gonna tuck this just right around the edges of all the bouquets, of the entire bouquet, and give it this beautiful finishing touch. It also is gonna take that hydrangea, if you have any pieces that are kind of hanging weird around the edges, takes that hydrangea, lifts it up, tucks it into the bouquet, and gives you a more tailored finished product there as well. They have a nice hard stem too. The one thing you have to worry about with Dusty Miller though, if it is not in water, it is going to wilt. So if you have short stems, skip it, because you're going to save yourself some trouble the next day of having to cut it all back out, because it will not last out of water. It doesn't ride like that. So here's our finished gorgeous bouquet for Ari this weekend. We are so excited for her to carry it. We hope she loves it as much as we do. Tune in next time.